Hey friend, Kira here. I just thought I'd try this voiceover thing, bring you along on this process to try and work on portraiture. Faces are weird. So what I'm doing here is whenever I'm trying to do a study, I really like to use my iPad and draw things out in Procreate just because I really like the features that using digital art has, like being able to undo and like smudge lines and things like that. And then I trace it onto a sheet of tracing paper. And then from there, I'll trace it onto my actual watercolor paper. Not a big fan of the tracing paper I have now. I think it's wax-based, so it kind of resists the water a little bit. And I'm using a couple of firsts with this video. The Arteza Watercolor Sketchbook. Arteza. I'm not entirely sure. I'm dyslexic. Words are hard. And I'm also using the Earth Friendly Watercolor palette from Vinci that Denise Soden from In Liquid Color actually helped create. She has her own color in there. It's called Denise's Green. It's really pretty. Didn't use it on this because not the most useful for skin tones in my experience. So here we go. I'm using the Cool Yellow, which is the Aerolite Yellow, and I'm also using the Warm Red, which is the Da Vinci Red, and I think that's just their version of a Pyrrole Red. I don't know. Paint brands like to come up with their own names. Winsor & Newton does it a lot. Y'all know my feelings on them. So I think I'm not entirely happy with how these studies came out. I started off with acrylic painting and then transitioned to watercolor painting whenever I ran out of storage space for the finished pieces because canvases take a lot of room. So what I was doing here was trying to establish values first before going in and adding like the flat washes and things like that. And I think that that's where I messed up on this. It's something I've been trying to change how my brain works with it. And I think my favorite one from this set that I enjoyed was the middle one and the last one, just because they turned out the best, and I also have the most experience painting faces in either the full profile, which is that middle one, and then the last one is like a 3/4 turned away. I like to do studies like this, just kind of as a warm-up. Oftentimes I'll just use like the leftover dirt on my palette from the painting from the day before. But today I was actually just wanting to bust this palette out because that cerulean blue finally set. I live in Central Texas and it's a fairly humid environment, so oftentimes the paints that have honey in them and vegetable glycerin don't always set the best. Like I think I poured this palette last week and it was finally solid enough for me to actually start working with without contaminating the whole pan. And if you notice here, I'm actually using two different brushes. I think that this is called the English painting method. I have the Silver Black Velvet, which is that black-handled one, with clean water, and then the Mimic Kolinsky, or the Mimic Squirrel brush, which is the gray-handled one, actually has the paint. I like using those for that because the Mimic brush doesn't have the best point. I've been using this set for probably 4 or 5 years now, so they're probably a little worn down, but those Silver Black Velvets have like the sharpest point I've ever seen. And here I'm just adding in the shadows. One of the issues I've been having a lot, or one of the big issues I've been having a lot recently is getting the nose or the shadows for the nostrils correct. I'm really happy with how it turned out on the profile view. And the first one and the fourth one, which is the one I just moved on from, I'm not happy with how they turned out at all. There were a couple of, let's just say it's obvious I see where I need to, work more, and that's okay. That's the point of doing studies like this, is, you identify what needs work so that you can get to the level that you want to be at. And one of the things that I'm doing in here, it's a cool little color theory thing. If you want something to be relatively vibrant, you can do like the underpainting, quote unquote, in a warmer tone. Like I'm using a really, really warm orange. And then later on I go in and glaze, which is just doing a really thin layer of red over that to bring it more into the, typical Caucasian fleshy tones. I think that that's one of the things I need to stop doing, because that's a very traditional oil painting and acrylic technique. Because generally with watercolor, you want to start off with looser washes and then have them get tighter and tighter the more detail you're rendering. And if you noticed, I used a little bit of ultramarine blue there just to kind of neutralize the skin tone I was working with, just to bring in some shadows. And something I've noticed with my new interest in portraiture is a lot of it tends to be negative painting, which is where you're not directly painting the thing, you're painting the edges around it to infer the shape. And that's been a really interesting thing for me to work on recently. Especially with noses, just because the shadows are so subtle with a lot of noses that if you get too harsh on your approach, it can look weird. And I believe all of these pictures were from the same model. This is from a series of pictures that I found on Pinterest. I tend to use Pinterest and Google for a lot of my reference images. If I'm making an actual painting, I won't use those websites. I'll use something that actually has, that I have rights to use. Like, see, here's whenever I'm going in and doing the red glaze. Kind of dropping it in where there's the most red in the picture, and then using the clean brush to just kind of fan it out. And here I actually switched the brush method. So the silver black velvet's the one with the paint, and the mimic squirrel is the one with the water. And one of the reasons that you would want to do something like that is to show the increased blood flow to the area. That's a really common thing to do if you're painting images of children, is to have more reds in the skin tones, just because generally speaking, children have better circulation to the surface of the skin, which is why, a lot of times kids have those like rosy cheeks and red ears and red nose and all that fun stuff. And this video is sped up. It took me about 30 minutes from transferring the image to the tracing paper to finishing the studies. But overall, I like the Arteza Sketchbook. I have one that's about half full with just micro mixes for colors, which is where you do gradients between two different colors and you just add a little more of one color to the mix. I might make a video on that later. Let me know if you want to see it, and I will bump that up on my list. And see in there, I just went in and dropped a little bit of shadow and then used a wet brush to kind of correct where the placement. This is typically how I like to paint the most. I find it gives me the most control. But yeah, that's what I have for this video. Thank you so much for coming by, watching And if you like what you saw, please like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. And stay safe out there. It's a wild time to be alive. Have a great day. Thanks.